Jody, stop texting. Okay, it's time. Oh, sneaky.
I'm old school texting.
I got a paper and a pen too. Amie, you? Oh, that's best friend stuff. What a way to start. It is the Just Started the Conversation podcast brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. Amie Allason Dundon, Jody, McCloud, Missmer. My name is Kevin Crockett. We all have our papers and pens that are all here and represented as well. Ladies, it's been a little bit. How are we? Everybody good? Everybody well?
Yeah, really good.
Well.
Excellent.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't had Jody for a couple, maybe, well, I guess missing a month with Jody when we had my friends and colleagues on for Recovery Month. So it's good to have you back.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back. It's good to be back.
You don't write, you don't call. We were worried. What was happening?
I was busy listening to that fantastic episode.
That
really was a great episode. If you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend going back and listening to that and sharing that one, because I think the recovery piece was great. And it kind of leads a little bit into today's conversation about guilt and shame. So
it does. Yeah. So whether embarrassment is tied into that, what age you are, maybe what things are kind of triggering those words and feelings for you. I think when I look at guilt and shame, it's kind of like sympathy and empathy, where maybe you're using one way and it really means the other. And I feel like this is one of those similar things. So Amie, I'm actually going to go ahead and start with you. When we're talking about guilt and shame, how are they similar? And more importantly, probably, how are they different from one another?
Yeah, this is another heavy topic. We keep bringing up the big guns. They are similar, but they also have a lot of space in between them, right? Shame makes you see yourself as a bad person. Makes you see yourself as a bad person. Guilt is when you know that you did something wrong. So guilt is, I was at a four-way stop and I didn't let the other person go, and I feel bad about it for a hot minute because I shouldn't have done that. I feel a little guilty about that. Could have caused an accident, right? Right, not nice. Shame is when I inherently believe that I'm not enough. I have, it helps, it keeps me stuck in that feeling of being defective, if you will, where guilt is something that can actually be helpful, right? We kind of need people in society to feel guilt so that they can kind of fix their moral compass. Guilt is not necessarily always a harmful emotion, can be helpful. Shame, always harmful.
Do you think? So I think back to, and this is really, so I'm glad you started with Amie first and foremost, because I was trying to last night come up with without Googling, right? Without Google, to describe shame and guilt. And I thought of something that made me think, or maybe question, is shame always bad? And I say it like this: the feeling of shame, that inward, because guilt I always think of as outward, right? Guilt is there's an outward piece that you've perhaps contributed to. Shame is inward, that you haven't necessarily contributed to. But I think about things I chose not to do in my life because I didn't want to feel shame. I love how you're looking at me.
I feel like we need to go deeper.
No. Okay. So I've never done drugs.
Okay.
Never even, recreational drugs.
Right.
Yes. Alcohol. Yes. I understand that's a drug. But I didn't, not because I couldn't and didn't have the opportunity, but because, God forbid, someone I respected, like my parents, would find out. I wasn't going to hurt anybody. It wasn't going to do, you know what I mean? But the fear of that shame.
But that implies to me more of a fear of guilt, because if you would have walked in that house and your parents would have smelled pot on you, the guilt.
Can't even.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't even.
Today. Can't even think of it today.
Can't even think of that
oh
today.
Gosh. Oh, yeah.
But I think that's why it's so complex. I think that's why whenever we were looking at this, there's been research studies done. Like I literally read a research paper last night. I haven't read a research paper since my child asked me to read her research paper and edit it. which I didn't do. Um,
And now you have
it was
guilt and shame about it. Continue. Yes.
it was interesting. I'm good. So, but it was interesting how even in research there was conflict on the feeling. But I think what today, if we can look at shame, as you said, it's that internal feeling, and then guilt is that external. I just want to be clear for the people who are listening or watching, you can find other examples and other pieces out there. I think it's just putting that name to it, and that's kind of our focus
Yeah.
is today. Our focus today is to kind of identify it, to be able to break through it, identify it, to be able to talk to it. And I just wanted to mention that because it was interesting as I was going through. I almost got myself more confused.
It's easy to do.
Yeah.
It's easy to spiral down. I think, when you know that you did something wrong, you're a good person who did something bad. That's where guilt comes in. The deeper, more the feeling that usually leads to more long-term mental health, behavioral health concerns, is the shame. And it's a lot of times it's people who maybe grew up in abusive environments, start to inherently feel undeserving. It's very painful. If untreated, shame can certainly lead to that feeling of just being unworthy of connection.
Well, and I would imagine there are behaviors that come with it, right? Because if I feel shame, I can feel some paranoia about some things. I can have kind of some unhealthy thoughts.
Yeah. And so that's where we start to see sometimes some non-suicidal self-injury, your self-mutilation, your cutting, experimentation with drug and alcohol, to kind of numb that kind of intense feeling of worthlessness. And again, we're talking in extremes. So right. I honestly feel like every single one of us has a little bit of shame and guilt. You can't really grow up as a human being and not. We're exposed to a lot of different things, a lot of different people, especially now with exposure to social media and the kind of constant barragement of body shaming. There's so many different ways to go with this.
You know what I don't hear anymore a whole lot? Shame on you. When I was right, Crockett, did anybody ever say that? Like I distinctly remember my mom or my Sunday school teacher or my grandma saying, "Shame on you." And I think of that when I think of that.
And it's funny because I feel like in any given moment, like you would almost rather get yelled at than shame on you. Had like this disappointment behind it. Like in a moment, if you did something that you shouldn't have done to your brother, your sister, you're being a goof or something like that, and you almost would rather have that than them give you that kind of look and just the shame on you. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you're right that when we do have an internal moral compass, it does stop us from doing things like drugs, like alcohol, like engaging in premarital sex, whatever that might, gambling, whatever, drag racing and street racing when you're a young adolescent male, and as an adult, right? Then infidelity, like it keeps us, our moral compass, in line most of the time,
right?
Or else the world would be complete anarchy. We all do a fairly good job. I think that one of the key things that we need to take a look at is how to make that clear distinction between what you did and who you are. What I did may have been wrong. Who I am is not wrong. And I think if we can work with each other as children and adults to kind of understand that who you are as a being, your soul, is not bad. You might have done something immoral, whatever, but that doesn't define you. And that's, I think, when we start to let our actions define us. that's where we start to see kind of the shame and the guilt kind of sink us down.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up. There's been a very popular musician recently who has been in the news for his decision making outside of his marriage. And one of the things that he put in his statement was that this incident isn't what defines me. Like it's hard because you brought up social media earlier, and I feel like it's the one thing that kind of connects all of us. It connects us at all different ages. You can see all different sorts of things. And kind of wanted his statement to be that this incident doesn't define me. Well, when you're in that spotlight, you are that kind of person that's there for everyone to see and respond to. The comments typically disagreed with that person about their decision making. So, um, I guess the question is, for all of us, maybe in more. First of all, I'm not going to try to sympathize with too many celebrities. You're out there in a spotlight, but for that conversation and for the conversation a little bit closer to home, moving past that shame, getting past that maybe one decision that you made that you did feel guilty over, that you now are kind of harboring these negative feelings for, um how do you get past the shame of what you feel about yourself?
Honestly, I think a big key to that is giving it a voice and stopping the secrets. There's an old saying in the recovery world, you're only as sick as your secrets. And that has stuck with me as a clinician, in helping people give a voice to that internal dialogue, those internal thoughts, letting people know you feel worthless, or letting people know what you're ashamed of and why. If we give that emotion and the surrounding self-talk a voice, it really can help us be freer. And yeah, when you're in the spotlight, you're going to hear it all. You're going to get the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I kind of applaud whoever that was for saying this doesn't define me, because to the rest of the world, it does, because that's all we see. But that's 1/1,000,000th of who a person is.
I think right now what's tough too is we don't get to make the mistakes necessarily that we got to make before. I can't, I think I have a still picture, those things that you print out and there's people on it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I have a still picture of a particular night in my life.
Uh-oh.
No. It's just, I'm standing outside.
It's not a calendar. You can find it. Yeah.
No, but I'm standing outside. I know exactly where I am. I can tell you the day. I know what I was doing. I was in college, and I think back, and I'm like, A, thank goodness it was a still picture.
Uh-huh.
B, thank goodness there's no videos or social posts or anything, and not because of anything I did that was
Right.
necessarily I need to be ashamed of or
Right.
feel guilty about. But it is interesting how now in our culture, sometimes we make mistakes, and that's exactly what they are. And we should feel guilty because we did something wrong, but we should also be able to apologize and make it okay because it doesn't define us. I think when we look at shame, sometimes we don't even own the shame we're feeling, meaning that I was talking to someone about this topic, and they kind of thought about it, and 24 hours later actually came back to me and said, wait a second, is this shame? I'm ashamed. Like, I feel shame for the things that my father did to other people.
Mm.
Like
Oh yeah.
I feel shame for the things that my dad did to people. And I know he did things and hurt people. I feel shame for that. And it was interesting because I said, why do you feel shame for something someone else did? So I think giving a voice to that, to kind of bounce that off of somebody, to talk that through, to say, does that really make sense? Because certainly if my own actions don't necessarily define my morality or my being, how in the world can someone else's actions brings shame and that emotion to you.
Right. And that's where, spinning back to what you had asked, Crockett, in terms of what do we do about this, that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in, so that you can talk it through and say, well, help me understand what you're telling yourself. And, how does that lead to your shame? And then how can we reframe that for you in a way that makes sense and is logical, right? Because shame is definitely passed down. It's intergenerational for sure. That's proven. And as a matter of fact, there's even some medical research studies out there with, showing how some of this gets locked in our chemistry from generation to generation. So it definitely is passed down until you give it a voice and you talk it through with somebody. 100%. Shame. The thing that I think we see a lot of, and we don't necessarily always peel all the layers of the onion away, is low self-esteem with shame, right? Just you say, oh God, her sense of self-worth isn't that great, or she needs to work on her self-esteem, or, I don't understand why she doesn't feel better about herself. She's so pretty, she's so smart, whatever. And a lot of times that stuff comes from that shame that I know I'm flipping, but I was watching, I think it was a TED Talk with Brene Brown. And one of the things that I heard her say was that guilt kind of comes later in life, when we really are, our brain's more fully developed. We don't just see ourselves as the center of the universe. We know there's more out there, right? Shame can be felt as early as 18 months old.
Wow.
So parents, siblings, classmates, teachers, family can start to shame someone very early in life.
It's interesting. I always use the example of the little kid who lets the door slam in your face. They are the center of their universe. They're through the door. There's no, they live
because
here.
They don't,
there's no, they don't even feel guilty for doing it, because it's
nor
not
should
even,
they, because they don't have that
because it's not an awareness, right? It's not an awareness. But it's interesting to hear you say that shame starts that young, and I think it's because it's an internal emotion, right? So it's something that you can feel, people can impact it, where guilt you feel, but it's more that you impact that because of your awareness to what you're doing. It's that outward piece.
Yeah.
So when we talk about shame, I'm assuming there are different types of shame. There's different experiences of shame.
Well, I think, Jody, even coming back to that story that you were telling about somebody reaching out to you, I think embarrassment, obviously that the person you were talking to wasn't directly involved in any way with his father's behavior, but was aware of it, or her father's behavior, whoever it was. But that embarrassment of feeling like you're maybe a part of that, or that someone may think that what was going on, or anything like that. Can we kind of talk about maybe, especially as I think we're talking about kids and trying to get them to understand, to your point, like their cognitive understanding of, hey, you just had the door slam in my face. They don't know that those kind of ideas are learned. Maybe, I guess the question I'm asking is, at what point do you realize you've gone from, I'm embarrassed by this particular incident, to harboring it, holding it, feeling shameful about what may be a part of your life experience?
I think part of that is when I verbalize it, and other people kind of, instead of helping to lift me up and see and see things from a healthy perspective, people bully or kind of drive the point home. So I'm going to give you an embarrassing moment from my life. There's many. I'll try to pick one.
Let's saddle up.
Right. Saddle up. Strap in. I was in chorus, theater. I was also an athlete in high school, but it was in middle school. It had to maybe be my last year of middle school. and we were doing some sort of assembly. There was an assembly, and we were in some sort of dance sing thing.
I'm getting nervous for her.
So
right now.
we're in an assembly in school, and I still remember. Okay, I'm 51. I still remember this. So obviously, something I never really let go of. We had to kick a little bit for something. I don't even remember what it was. My shoe flies off, Crockett, into my peer, the crowd of the assembly of my peers. You can,
I really thought you were going to say you kicked a kid down, and then it was
No,
like Home
I
Alone.
kicked-
Then they all just
listen,
like
I
fell
kicked-
down. Yeah.
No, I kicked a shoe off. Is that a big deal? It was a huge deal to a girl in middle school,
Sure. Yeah.
you know, because all the football players who caught the shoe,
Good for them.
good for them, because they could catch. Like the rest of the day, I obviously didn't get my shoe back because it was a keep Amy's shoe away from her day. And that I tell that story to say, you know, I was embarrassed, and I was ashamed, but I was only ashamed because my peers shamed me.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay.
I wouldn't have felt
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah. I thought that's where you were going, because when you asked that question, Crockett, about being embarrassed is that moment of, the shame is whether it is the response that is perceived, you know?
Right, because shame typically makes it difficult to get close to others. So obviously, that didn't help, right? Because I just felt horrified. And you could laugh, and now you can make
She's been
fun
wearing
of,
knee-high boots ever since. She won't even.
I have boots on today.
I wish I could show you, but I can't. But that's not why. I don't think I do.
Just
love
put your foot up. I'll catch it.
I do love boots. Maybe we just figured it out.
Shame changes your behavior.
There it is. Yeah.
It can, but no, I think embarrassment, I think shame, and again, this is starting the conversation, right? So shame is deeper. It can be deeper, I should say. Embarrassment, that momentary piece, it's that response that you get. Sometimes, here's the funny thing too, to your point about being shamed for things. Sometimes as a kid, you don't even know that you should be embarrassed for something that you did.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You do something, and you then find out that you should be embarrassed, somebody even as an adult, people say to me, well, Jody, remember you did this? I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, you probably shouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Like,
right. Question mark. Yeah.
Yeah. Question mark. I think shame is that's deeper, that's inward. And if it's not dealt with, becomes very, very damaging to a person's psyche, to their self-esteem, to their relationships, to how they behave around others, to how they grow and how they parent. And it's not necessarily bad. I know individuals who have experienced, trauma and shame, and they've gone through very specific steps to not repeat, because as you said, it's generational.
Mm-hmm.
So you can change that, but it takes some of the deeper pieces take some work.
Yeah, you can change all of it. And that's the beautiful part about how far we've come with psychiatry and with mental health therapy and treatment, is that all of this the ship is fairly easily righted if you're with the right person to help you get through it. It's if we continue to stick around those people that are going to pile on the negativity and the abuse, where it can turn into toxic shame, which is that prolonged shame, where it really does become, it leads to that chronic negative emotions, where there's nothing positive, and we kind of then start to feel shameful about everything in our life. So, I think there's a lot of hope there in terms of how do we overcome this. There's some really good books out there. There's some really good children's books out there to start to deal with feelings. And also domestic violence, right? We're starting to talk more about that and have more space for people that are in domestic violence situations to go and talk about things and not stay stuck in that shame cycle, which I think we see so often in domestic violence. So there's a lot of really good help there. And just talking about it is the first step, because I think a lot of people don't take that time to think, well, where's my shame? Where does my shame lie? Do I have any? Where's my guilt lie? Are there things that I haven't ever made amends for that maybe I should make amends for, that might help to lift it a little bit for me?
I have a question on that. Do you, if someone's experiencing shame or they've, prolonged period of time, you'd said about apologizing, or if it has to do with something that was done to you,
then you don't have to apologize.
right? Okay, so
I'm thinking guilt. Like is there something that I've done that I feel guilty about that I've kind of kept a secret? That's important to give a voice to and to own it and to say, you know what, I hurt you when you were 16, and here's what I remember doing, and I'm really sorry. That's important, really good self-healing.
So to all those football players out there who caught Amie's shoe,
and whoever's still got it today that bronzed it and leaves it sitting on their
give
nightstand.
Amie her shoe back.
Yes.
No,
She's been walking around with one shoe on ever since. We'd love
really
to get her
sad.
balanced if we could.
Yeah, it's never gonna happen.
I kind of want to come back to the idea of feeling shame or guilt, maybe in situations that aren't necessarily your fault. We've kind of talked about, your circle, your people. We've talked about domestic violence and, maybe perhaps staying in a relationship longer than you should because you're going to feel a certain kind of way despite how somebody might be making you feel. How do you kind of take the first step to, I think the first step is maybe realizing that, hey, this isn't every time I'm around these people, I don't feel great. I feel anxious. I'm feeling a certain kind of way. It's very easy to say, hey, you're in a difficult relationship, get out of it. It's very easy from the outside to say that. We all know that that's not necessarily the case. For someone that perhaps does feel shame about what's been done to them or the people in their circle that are quote unquote their family, their quote unquote friends, how can we kind of help facilitate a way to say, hey, this isn't the healthiest situation that I can be in. How can I be proactive and do things to maybe get myself on the other side of, what can be a little bit of a difficult hump?
That's a really heavy question.
I really wish there was a good answer to that. I'm a proponent for folks that are kind of in the thick of things in terms of family guilt, family shame, to give back. It's a really good way to help get people out of that place where they feel inherently, I'm going to say the word dirty, like dirty or worthless or useless. And whether it's something that they should own or not, if it's generational or intergenerational or something dad did or grandma did or aunt did, if you can kind of step outside of yourself and give back to people that need serving at a soup kitchen or working at a homeless shelter, putting back care packages together for the homeless. If we can get outside of that really dark place in our own head and pay attention to and focus on other people, it does certainly help us, feel needed by other people and realize how needed we are by other people, and helps us to get a little bit unstuck.
I think it sounds so simple that you could take some of your time and give back, but that volunteering and that contribution that you make in those moments gives so much back. I mean, even individuals who aren't experiencing any kind of shame or whether it's toxic or it's significant guilt of a secret, giving back does so much for us as human beings. Number one, you're surrounding yourself, you're focused, but you're surrounding yourself with other people who are carrying forth the same mission. There's gratitude, you're getting some really positive reinforcement, and it's another form almost of therapy. Like I often say to people, talk therapy, it works for some people. Talk therapy maybe doesn't work for some people, but therapy comes in many forms.
Yeah.
And that's a great form of therapy. Volunteering, giving back, having some sort of fundraiser or a drive for something that's important. And it doesn't have to be related to where your shame
No.
comes from. As a matter of fact, maybe it's better that it doesn't come from there. But there are a lot of things that you can do to contribute and to help and to be a part of. In our area, when you look at the Lehigh Valley or you look at Eastern Pennsylvania, you look at all of these things that happen and these events, and I always look to see who it's benefiting. So this may sound really silly, but on Saturday, I went to a honeybee festival. And for me, what was important, and my husband, when he listens to this, will laugh, I have forced my husband to stop getting rid of our dandelions, right? I know I'm going off in another direction, but to me on Saturday, it was more than just being a part of this festival. It was about contributing to something that I believed in, and it felt good. It felt good. It wasn't just, a festival to have a festival. There was a meaning behind it. So finding those meaningful things, I think, are important.
I'm going to jump right back into kind of the start of that question. There was kind of about the negative people that could be in your life. And you guys kind of brought up the company that you keep in doing these kind of things, whether that be volunteering, working with someone who's pushing towards the same cause that you are. I would imagine probably a pretty positive mindset in doing that as well. I think that's a great way to, and even Jody, to your point, while certainly if there is a cause that's close to your heart, or has caused you harm, and you want to do that, something to contribute to that, to benefit other people, great. But yeah, find just something in a completely different realm and kind of erase the board a little bit for yourself and kind of reset your mind in a sense of just, here's something that I can do that's going to give me some positive feelings. I'm going to be working with some positive people. And that hopefully by the time all is said and done, you've got a lot of people in your life that are positive and working towards a cause, not only a cause in a, quote unquote kind of charity sense, but in you, invested in you as a person and hoping that you're well and continuing to press forward. Again, I think in a world where it's very easy to, I do it all the time. I actually just got, and I forgot the watch today, but I just got a watch because I was finding myself being like, man, I am on my phone way too much. I've got 2 little kids. I want to wrestle around with them. I want to it's so easy to fall into, I like to call social media a highlight reel, because nobody's on there posting typically their most difficult stuff. They're posting all the wonderful things that they're doing with their families and those things. And I think just to hit a reset button and get away from that and focus on the things that you love, focus on the things that make you happy, can, at least for a little time, it's not going to change the world for you, but at least for a little time. And if you do that enough, you keep filling that cup up enough, hopefully your cup is full when you kind of get to the other side of things, particularly if you're feeling guilty or shameful about anything that may be a part of your history.
100%. And what you just described, Crockett, is called mindfulness. And mindfulness really is when we take that minute to be present in the moment, be in the here and now, whether it's meditating, journaling, whatever that is. If I can kind of shut out all the extraneous noise and be present in what I'm doing right now, wrestling with my kids, baking cookies with my mother, journaling, where maybe I'm writing out my story of toxic shame so I can get it out of my head and onto paper and put away. That's being mindful. And mindfulness is a key concept in dialectical behavior therapy, which we use for all sorts of different reasons in the therapy room. And we know that paying attention instead of getting caught up in the past, really does also help to propel us forward. So your watch is helping you be mindful, Crockett.
Even though I forgot it today, obviously very.
Okay, well,
very
not
mindful.
today.
Not today.
But
not
most
today.
days.
I've been doing really well with it, though, but it does. It's made an impact. It's I think my daughter particularly now is 6, and she's at an age where I started to notice her doing things like, here, like, let me act like I'm taking a picture and all this stuff. And then I was like, man, are we doing these sorts of things? Like, are we just literally like this so much that, she's picking up on it? And I want her to go see the sun and the bees. Perhaps we can go and take her to see dandelions and bees.
It's
You would
very
love
nice.
this. You would love this. She will not, if we find a bug in the house, how much I want to hit it with a little towel and just get rid of it doesn't matter. I have to catch that thing however I can, and I have to take it outside, whether it's 10 o'clock at night or it's the middle of the day. That kid, I'm making memories for that kid. I better not hear of her being ashamed of her father and how he was treating bugs back in the day. I know that much. I've at least had that one.
She's a pacifist.
Yeah,
She's
there
a
we go.
pacifist.
There we go. Well,
It's
go
yeah.
ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think that, shame is pretty heavy. And I think some people might listen to this and say, oh, that's really great. You think I can just go volunteer? I can do things. I think that what was just mentioned in that mindfulness, when we talk about breathing and holding for 4 seconds and breathing out and doing that for a period of time, that's being mindful in those moments. Start there. We're certainly not saying go out and start, some big volunteer organization. You might not be ready for that, but some of this shame, be aware of perhaps some behaviors that you're seeing, maybe some thoughts that you're having, and see if you can put a name to it. And by doing that, giving it a name, giving it a voice, giving it a story that Amie said, hopefully you can move through it and past it and then not pass it on.
Yeah, the key is to know that you're worth it.
For sure.
You're worth the work. You're worth working through the difficult stuff, because it's, once you get over the other side, it's a great place to be.
And I think that's a great place to wrap it up today, ladies. That was a wonderful conversation. And again, we called it the Just Start the Conversation podcast for a couple of reasons, but really because at the end of most of these episodes, we kind of come back to that exact thought. Start a conversation, whether it's being mindful and having one with yourself, going to talking to somebody professional, going to talk to somebody just in your life and just being like, hey, I'm carrying a lot of stuff around and I kind of just need to get it off my back a little bit. Maybe that's just the way to do it, to just start the conversation. And that is the podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. For Amie Allason Dundon and Jody McCloud Missmer and all the bees and dandelions out there. This one's for you too. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Just Start the Conversation podcast.